For you, sir.
I'm doing very well. It's good to see you. I'm liking your post on Facebook.
Oh,
They're enjoyable. I see you. Let's see what's he got now.
oh, we're always doing something. We have a lot of fun at my house.
That's the way it's supposed to be.
We laugh our way through life.
Thank you. William's going to lead us in the invocation now.
Let's bow our heads in prayer. Our Heavenly Father, we thank you for this beautiful day. We thank you for this day to be together in the service of Rotary. Father, we pray for this day. We pray for our conversation. We pray for our fellowship. Most of all, we pray for those in need. We ask that you will fill our hearts with love and grace to serve our communities as we so love to do. We ask and pray that you will touch the lives of all those around us. We pray for this food, the nourishment of our bodies, and our bodies back to your use. In your name we pray. Amen.
Thank you to all the veterans in the room, and please join me in saying the pledge of allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, William and Josh. Great to have you all with us today. This is the last call for raffle tickets. I see Patty walking up here towards Carter with the box. So if you've not gotten your ticket and you want one, please make your way over to Carter. Great to have y'all with us. Joe, do we have anybody on Zoom today?
We do. We have quite a few out there.
So how many do we have?
8.
8 people on Zoom. So to those of you on Zoom, great to have you with us. Thanks for being with us, and we hope you enjoy the meeting from there. All right, pop-ups today. Ed Lombard.
So this is a little bit of a somber one. Everybody, please keep Dr. Scott Whitray in your prayers. Was just diagnosed with brain cancer, is getting ready to have surgery. So please stop in your prayers. Thank you.
Thank you, Ed, and please keep us updated, if you will, as you get updates on that. When do you know when the surgery is?
Tomorrow morning.
Tomorrow morning. All right, y'all put on your powerful thoughts tomorrow morning, please. And we'll go ahead and do the rest of Family of Rotary while we're at it on that. And I don't see Palmer, so I'm gonna go ahead and do it. Ron Roberts reported that Dave Collier has been moved to Park Ridge, which is on College Street in the Avondale Riverside area. That's Dave Collier. Ed Pratt Daniels has had his 5th grandchild. So that's a happy one. And please join me in congratulating Mike O'Brien. Mike has just taken a new position with the 5-Star Veterans Center. So congratulations, Mike. Are there any other pop-ups? Anything like that? All right, Carter, will you please
Bring this over today before we take it over. Okay, so the winning number is 068 462 5.
What were the last 4 digits?
4625.
That's me. There's 147.
It's too bad we don't have a set of drums to do a drum roll here.
Next week we will.
So close, not really. Thank you guys, and thanks for participating, everybody. And as Carter said, that pot's going to grow every week, so your chances of scoring big time increases each week. So Carter, since you're there with a microphone, do you want to introduce our guests and visiting Rotarians? And then do you have a Rotary history moment for us today?
I do have a.
Woo-hoo, okay, I'm gonna turn it over to you. Our Sergeant at Arms, Carter Rosenblum.
We do have a guest today.
Got my good friend, Michael Muldoon, he's a former Rotarian here. Long time ago.
So I did find some time this week to put together a moment in Rotary history. It's been a couple weeks, so I'll start where I left off. It was the last convention that Paul Harris attended in 1912 in Duluth, Minnesota. He had just been voted out of the position of being the president of Rotary. He took this a little bit personally, but also due to some health issues and some other things going on, he decided it was time to take a break. So this time frame is called it's from 1912 to 1918. Some people call it his exile, others call it his I'll find my notes here.
Period of recharge.
Period of recharge. Thanks, Jeff. So Paul decided in 1912 he was going to take a break. He didn't take a full break. He decided it was very important. He got, I guess, what you would call a lot of fan mail. So he still got a lot of letters from Rotarians, and he also got letters from the board on advice for things, and he thought it was important that he answers those. So he stayed in touch with people. He also thought it was very important to entertain guests that wanted to come to his house. So he kept involved that way, but he stayed away from any conventions or any club meetings, anything like that. There were two main factors during this time, which actually made him want to get more involved with Rotary again, which he later did in subsequent years. The first thing was the First World War. During this time, throughout the time that Paul's been trying to get Rotary up and started, he wanted to switch from it being a business networking group to a community service group. He had a lot of resistance with that. And during this time, during World War II, for some reason, Rotary clubs began to get more involved with building school parks, building swimming pools, doing stuff for youth programs. And this encouraged him to be a little bit more involved. They also, at the same time, Rotary clubs, which is sort of a mixed bag, got involved with a group called the APL, which stands for the American Protection League. This league was kind of interesting when I was reading about it, because as you can imagine, things can spiral out of control pretty quickly, but it was basically a group of unlicensed citizens who were helping find German spies and infiltrating unions and businesses. And they were basically unlicensed agents that had authority to do what they felt they needed to do to find German spies. At the time, a lot of Rotary clubs became very active and one of the main groups in the APL. It wasn't until afterwards that a lot of stories came forward that they found out that this group probably exercised a little too much power than they actually had. But those two things made Paul much more enthusiastic about the direction Rotary is going. But the biggest motivator for Paul Harris to come back was some articles that Chess Perry put together. He was the secretary of Rotary at the time, and he was big in starting Rotary with Paul Harris. And before this, Perry and Harris had a little bit of conflict with each other. But Chess Perry decided it would be a great idea if they started putting articles out about the history of Rotary. And in doing so, like most people, these pieces were meant to get young people interested in the program. But in writing the articles, they were highly exaggerated. There were some stories that just exaggerated and weren't true about the events and some of the founders that made them seem a little grander than they really were. But these articles worked. They made people interested. And so he continued to do them. Now, the downside of this was after writing these articles, Paul Harris became a bit of a godlike figure or so in Rotary. And it started making people wonder why the founding father wasn't involved with any of the events or conventions. So Ches Perry was frustrated by this, and he knew that Paul Harris wasn't going to start coming to the events on his own. So Ches Perry put together in the Rotarian magazine, an article that said, Paul Harris would love for you to visit him at his house. So any Rotarian that's able, please go see Paul Harris. Well, out of this, a lot of Rotarians went to go visit, and it energized Paul Harris, and it also made him feel a little bit more energetic about going back to Rotary. So that's how they reconciled their relationship. The plan worked, and in the next weeks we'll talk about some of the new projects and things moving forward that Ches Perry and Paul Harris put together to get Rotary back into community service projects. And that's my moment in Rotary history. I can bring Stu Irwin up here to introduce our guest today.
Working with one eye today, so I look a little. It's working? Okay. It's my pleasure today to introduce a program that I think all of you all will enjoy. About a little over 10 years ago, a friend of mine came to me and said, there's a business here producing honeybee honey. It was producing more than they could market, and they were looking for some help putting together a program. So three of us formed, four of us, I'm sorry, Be Friends Farm, and went about packaging, marketing, and selling honey. And every morning, for the first couple of years, I did a lot of the purchasing, paid some of the bills, stuff like that. Did deliveries, did Whole Foods, Fresh Market, some of the customers. And every morning before sunlight, I would go out to the farm to help milk the bees. And all of you that have grown up on farms know that when you go to milk a cow, it's pretty easy. You've got white milk, chocolate milk, buttermilk, and sometimes either cream or skim milk. But with bees, it's a lot more trouble. They don't stand still like a cow, and you really have to work hard to milk them. But with that lead-in, I'm going to introduce you to Mike Leach and his wife Christy, who are the official beekeepers, and then I'll get out of the way. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you, Stu, for the introduction. He forgot to mention he played a vital role during a short period of our time as a labeling all the bottles. And I remember I'm feeling bad for him because it's a tough job to sit there and label those bottles in the early days. Unfortunately, my wife does a lot of that now. So let's see, we're gonna bring up our presentation here.
Give me just a
But
minute.
I'm Michael with Be Friends Farm, and I brought my wife to join us, and we are now probably the two main people that oversee all operations of the beekeeping.
I turned it off. Give me a second.
I'm going to give you a little quick story about the queen bee. I'll give you a quick story about this bee right here. This is interesting. This is not my bee. But one day I was driving out on the farm, looking out the window, and there was a bee flying right alongside my window, just like this one. It was really cool. It was like she was flying. I looked at the speedometer, and she was going about 25 miles an hour.
I'm still getting you there. Keep talking.
Right. So that was a cool experience one early morning to have her just sitting there flying along. And we followed each other. Well, I don't know if she followed me or I followed her, but we went back to the bee yard together. So she was out foraging early in the morning, and I was just arriving, and she was headed back. And some people ask me, do I get stung? I get stung all the time. But sometimes you find these nice, gentle bees, and these are mostly docile. You don't get much trouble out there.
Yeah, go ahead. I'm trying to get the folks at home online to see it. Clicker working. That's good. Well, there you go. 1 week we're going to have an easy one.
Sorry.
That's not your fault.
Is that a honeybee right there?
It is a honeybee. While we're waiting to try to keep her from being dead quiet here. One interesting thing about bees, how many eyes do bees have? Anybody know? We have the two compound eyes we're familiar with. So you remember the two big eyes? And they have about 1,000 facets in each eye. But between those two eyes and behind the head, they have 3 additional eyes called ocelli. And those ocelli are what they use to navigate. So you think of your GPS on your phone or in your car, the bees have a built-in GPS that navigates from the sun and the angles and the date and the time of the day. So when we place them out in the bee yard that's new to them, or if they're just a young bee that hasn't been out of the hive to fly yet, the first thing she'll do is come out and she'll start to do orientation flights about 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock in the afternoon every day. And new beekeepers usually get a little alarmed because they think their bees are swarming off into the trees, but it's actually just a natural process that the bees go through to learn the location of the entrance to their hive. And this location is so precise that if I move the hive more than a foot away from where it was at, they'll go to an empty part of the yard before they enter their hive. If me or you came home in the evening and somebody moved our door from the front to the side, we would probably just walk around to the side and go in. But they rely on that location that accurately to just go into the hive right there. You might get to see some ocelli in this video. All right, so we're going to talk a little short story about the queen because that's one of my biggest questions I get. This is a nice, beautiful queen that I took a picture of the other day while I was checking through our hives. And you notice she has a bunch of little eyeballs looking at her, and those are worker bees that are tending to her. They will follow her throughout the day through the hive, taking care of her, all of her needs. They feed her. They produce a special food called royal jelly that she only gets. The more royal jelly they feed her, the more eggs she lays. She will lay about enough weight in the eggs per day equal to her body weight. I think I might say that a little stuttery, but all right. So a couple things. What is her role in the hive? Why is she so important, and where does she come from? These are some of the main questions. I think we lost.
Point the clicker to this.
All right. When you click that menu on the slideshow.
All right.
All right, so what is the role of the queen bee? Her main role of the queen bee is to lay the eggs and ensure the survival and growth of the colony. The queen bee is the only bee in the colony capable of laying fertilized eggs, which develop into worker bees, or unfertilized eggs, which develop into male drones. And that's pretty an interesting thing. So here's a picture of the queen that we just saw, the same queen. She has now chosen a cell, and she's laying an egg in the bottom of that cell. This is what an egg looks like when she's done laying the egg. She'll lay about 2,000 of those a day during the springtime, and then she'll just kind of maintain a small population on other times of the season when it's not as busy. This egg will further develop into what we call brood, and the brood cycle will last upwards about 3 weeks or 21 days, where those emerging baby bees will come out and populate the hive as young workers. The hive is made of 3 castes. The queen herself, there's only 1 queen per hive in every hive, and also the worker bees that tend to every duty of the hive. Their division or their work is based on their age. So the division of labor is based on their age. As they first emerge from the combs and they're young baby nurse bees, they do everything to tend to the inside of the hive. They will feed the queen, when the eggs hatch, they'll feed the larva. They'll store honey or nectar, and they'll convert it into honey and cap it with wax. They'll do wax building or chores. They'll guard the hive. They're actually very clean. A good healthy hive will clean the hive out, just like we sweep the house at home. So they have lots of roles for about 3 weeks inside the hive. After 3 weeks, they go into a foraging mode for the rest of their life, and they'll forage for an additional 3 weeks where they're basically bringing home the groceries. One of the interesting things here it mentions is it says fertilized eggs make worker bees. Worker bees make up about 97% of the hive, and they're all female. Unfertilized eggs make up male drones, which only make up a small percentage of that, maybe the additional 3%. What fascinates me is, how does this happen? How do you have a fertilized egg and an unfertilized egg? Well, when the queen is mated, she has a spermathecal that stores sperm from all the male drones she mated with one mating flight. She'll carry that along with her for the rest of her life for the next possibly 3 or more years. As she sits there and lays this egg, she measures the size of the cell and determines whether the cell is designed for a worker bee or whether it was designed for a male drone. If it was a 5.1 millimeter, she'll lay a fertilized egg. So as her egg is being deposited, she actually inseminates it with the sperm. If the cell, which I don't have a picture here, but the cell is slightly larger in the 6 millimeter range, she'll notice that with her front legs, she'll lay an unfertilized egg. She'll deposit an egg that's not been fertilized. This is where it gets kind of fascinating. That's a haploid. It only contains half of the chromosomes. And if any of us had half our chromosomes, you know where we'd be. But it develops into the male drone. He doesn't have a father. He only has a grandfather. He skips a generation. That's kind of, think about that for a second. That's kind of wild. But a neat thing that we've recently found out through genetic testing is that the male drones, their responsibility in the genetic makeup of the future bees is about 75%. So when a queen mates with a male drone and she stores that sperm, his offspring from that sperm is going to produce about 25% of the genetic material in the new workers. And the queen only is responsible for about 25%. But also she mates with maybe 12 or more drones, so there's a big diversity in the male drone pool there. So it's kind of I'm getting more detail of that, but we're gonna finish this. It's space bar. Just go one more.
It's dropped out on me again. Don't know why.
Sleep. All right.
Is that it?
All right. So now, why is she so important? I kind of described a bunch of things why she's important, but there's some more things that are pretty important about the hive. When the queen bee maintains a social order in the hive through the use of pheromones by emitting the variety of chemical signals that influence the behavior and development of other bees in the hive, in the colony. And these pheromones also help to regulate the worker bee behavior. And one of the most important things is prevent the development of a new queen bee. We're going to talk about it a little bit further, but basically all the bees communicate with a type of pheromone that they can, in the hind end of them, in their abdominal section, which you guys see one. Right in their back end, they have a little orifice that opens up and they can actually fan out a pheromone to communicate lots of different signals to the bees. And I'll jump out of this topic, but y'all know why we use bee smokers is because we can mask that pheromone. When they put out the alarm pheromone, the smoke kind of covers that up and they can't tell the 40,000 other bees that, hey, there might be a problem. Once we've opened the hive, my thought and not anything, only my observations and reasoning is that once I open a hive and I become in, or I go into the hive to do an inspection, I feel that those pheromones kind of mask me. And so that I actually become one with the hive. And that's why I don't have to continue smoking the bees after the initial entry to the hive. So those pheromones bring it, but they play a big role in how the bees go through their day. Another question would be, when we talk about each hive has a single bee, queen, when a worker bee goes out on a forage flight and comes back and accidentally ends up at the wrong beehive, she would know that she was the wrong beehive because of that pheromonal smell in the hive. All right, and where does she come from? This is probably the more fascinating thing. We talked about the drone and the worker, where they came from, but the queen bee, she actually comes from her own egg. But the bees do a magical thing to that egg. So she's produced through a process called queen rearing, which worker bees select a few young larvae to develop the queen and select larvae and feed them again with that royal jelly. That's that special magic food. And that triggers the physiological changes that result in the emergence of a fully formed queen. I told you that the brood cycle is about 21 days, and that is true for the typical worker bees. But for the queen bee, to show the sense of urgency nature has, she actually emerges within 14 days. And so a queen that may be failing in a hive and may be becoming ill or sick or unfertile would be recognized by the worker bees, and they would know that they need to choose to raise a new queen. And in other instances would be if a managed hive is being inspected and the queen is accidentally killed during the process of the inspection, they would become queenless. They would then take a larva of very young age on exactly day 4, the eggs are only eggs for 3 days, and on the fourth day when they hatch, those worker bees have to choose a few of those larvae to feed this royal jelly. The royal jelly is made in a gland in the head of the worker bees, and it's a different type of food than all the rest of the bees eat. By gorging this larva on this food, and she'll get about 1,000 feedings before she's actually ready to pupate, whereas her worker bee, her sister right beside her, would be only fed about 50 times, and it would be a food called, we refer to as bee bread. You see in this cell here, this is not really this is not royal jelly, this is more of a bee substance food that they feed the larva. Okay. After about 14 days, she'll emerge from the cell and she'll go on a mating flight. And during the mating flight, we beekeepers hope that she mates with at least 12 or more male drones in that one day, and returning to the hive and continuing to keep the population in check and going. All right, that was my little bee story. Any queen questions? Go ahead.
So, how long does a queen bee live?
Well, in reality, to me, how long does the queen bee live? In commercial settings, I believe we get 12 to 18 months out of a good queen. We have pests and disease now that are actually affecting the queens, and they just don't have much after that. Textbook, we say 3+ years. So they still get some queens that get 3 years, but it's rare.
Okay, and what do they do like during the winter? Where do they hibernate? Or?
So the bees go in Florida and the southeast region. The bees are more they don't go as dormant as they might up in the Midwest or up in the northern states, Northeast. But they will mostly just go dormant, and there's not a lot of food. We call that food dearth when there's not a lot of food, and they'll just be less active and try to maintain, conserve energy, because the more energy they burn, the more food stores they waste during those periods of time. All right, so I'm going to give you a quick rundown of who we are and the kind of things we do in our operation as beekeepers. So we're Bee Friends Farm. Bee Friends Farm is a small family business in Jacksonville, Florida, dedicated to sustainable beekeeping. As your neighborhood beekeeper, we strive to educate community through importance of bees and promoting responsible beekeeping practices. We offer raw honey products and bee-related items while prioritizing the health and well-being of our bees. And we use a practice called migratory beekeeping to help move our bees to locations that need pollination or to maximize our honey production throughout the year, because most blooming plants that produce surplus nectars only bloom for about 3 to 4 weeks a year. So this is myself and my wife. We're actively working our bees or our business pretty much 7 days a week at some level or another. We have 3 kids. We have our oldest is our son Nathan. He's a little older now. He's 21. Our middle girl, Anna, she's just started going to college at FSU, and she's majoring in music. And then our littlest one started the business when she was born, and that's Naomi, and she's now 13. But they've been actively involved with the business, helping with maintenance on bee equipment or assembling bee equipment, painting bee equipment, other bee-related jobs throughout most of their lives. So they're pretty well versed in the business. Stepping back even a little further in the family, their great-grandfather was a beekeeper as well as their father, and they were both commercial beekeepers through the early 90s when they sold the business out to another beekeeper. And the bee business went dormant for about 25 years before me and my wife got back into it. And that's a whole another story on its own, how that happened. Some of the tasks that we do throughout the year is we have to raise queens. So we talked about the queen story and the way that bees raise their queens. Well, we kind of artificially do that ourselves as well. So we'll go to a frame of, we'll pull a frame or harvest a frame of larvae of the right age from the hive. And we'll use this little instrument here to actually remove the larva, and we'll place it in these strips that have these prepared queen cups on them, just like the bees would do in the hive themselves. We'll then introduce this frame full of ripe larvae into a queenless hive that we earlier prepared. When we made that hive queenless, those queen pheromones that resist the temptation to raise a new queen are now gone. And when they receive those nice fresh larvae, they're ready to raise a new queen. And so they'll gorge these cells with that royal jelly for the next few days until they've actually capped them. And these are actually the cells that are capped on the bars We missed one here and here, so we might have got either one too old or we damaged the larva in the process. With this system, we can raise about 45 new queens at a time. And this is a close-up of it. We'll actually take a knife and we'll kind of skin these off of here. And they'll be used to introduce into the new hives. And this is kind of what we do. We take healthy parent colonies like this one and this one, and we'll tear them down and we'll look for the proper ingredients in the hive, hopefully stumble upon the queen so we know where she's at. And we'll transfer those parts of the hive with bees into a new plastic milk box like this one. This hive would be queenless, and we would leave the queen behind in the original location. We then place these hives out in a location like this, and we will introduce those queen cells into those hives. Those ripe queen cells will hatch within a day of us introducing them. Those queens then have to go on a mating flight. And in this case, we line the bees up along these fence posts in groups of 3 and facing different directions, because remember that important thing about orientation with those extra eyes? We want to be sure the right queen gets back to the right home. And each of these, I don't have a good picture of, but each of these have a spray paint green circle or a yellow square or something on it, because they do recognize color. So we help get them back to the hive the proper way. This is when we purchase queens from another breeder, they'll come shipped in these little cages like this. And they'll be shipped a little bit of sugar candy here that the attendants that are shipped with them will feed the queen and themselves to kind of make the trip to us. And they are shipped in the mail, U.S. mail, like any other piece of postage. As I said earlier, we're migratory beekeepers. We're constant. It's one of the oldest nomadic events in the world since man has been keeping bees. We've moved them with us. Bees are not native to North America. They were imported in by the Spanish, and they propagated the U.S. through that method. And just like today, we still move the bees all over. Some of the things we have to do is we have to transport. I hit the wrong button. Transport them on transport trucks. We have our own truck that's not quite as big as a semi. This holds 408 colonies. This one holds almost 200. And in this case, we have a picture of our enclosed trailer that we use to do we have to bring our honey harvesting equipment with us sometimes. Like when we go to Michigan, travel to Michigan, we don't have the facilities up there to extract the honey. So we actually bring a mobile unit with us. This is a sample staging yard that we would stage bees in just prior to being loaded or unloaded from big trucks before they're being dispersed to other yards. And when we arrive to a new location, we usually have some yard maintenance. We weed eat or have to mow it. And sometimes landowner's generous and goes out with his bush hog and gets it all taken care for us. Some locations we have to install electric fencing like this because of bears, and we want to keep them away from the hives. I didn't take a picture of this, but this particular yard had a bear attack right there. And what I did was I built the fence first and put the bees in second, and I put that last hive just a few feet off the fence, and the bear was able to reach through the fence. It didn't damage the hive completely, but it tipped it over. And it must have got shocked about the same time all that happened, because it abandoned its mission of eating the hive. What's interesting about bears and hives is in the early spring months, bees are producing that brood from that queen laying. And their concentration is more to raise babies and build a population of about 40 or 50,000 new bees to be ready to forage for that nectar. And we think of bears and honey, right? That's not really the case. The bears are really smelling the brood. They want the proteins from the hive. So I know this yard here was building lots of brood about the time that happened. So the bear must have smelled the proteins. So once we have our yards set and established, we could be after many things. We might be after, in our one case, we pollinate blueberries or almonds out in California. We have many native plants that we call varietal honey. So we might get saw palmetto honey, or just some wildflowers. This is actually goldenrod, Brazilian pepper, or different varieties. So we place those bees in specific areas where there's abundance of that blooming plant that the bees will be foraging from. Bees are monofloral, so when they go out and forage for the day, they find one plant that's producing copious amounts of nectar and food sources, and they'll choose that plant to stay with it until it's finished blooming. We have native blackberries all over here, and they'll be blooming here shortly, so they'll benefit on the early spring buildup of that. So there's just some of the things that we do or we're hunting. All right, so once we've put the bees out for forage and it's time to harvest the honey, we start to go out and collect it. We use loaders to we transfer all the honey supers onto a pallet, and then we load these onto a truck. And then we haul them back into our honey house, and we can process about 10 barrels of honey a day. It's about 300 honey supers. So there's probably 20 supers on this pallet, 20, I think I put 24 on there at a time. And then it weighs about 700 pounds of boxes and equipment, honey, maybe 800 pounds. We get them back into the honey house, about 300 of these. And then we deploy our kids again and the kids' friends and anybody that wants to come over and spend about 8 to 10 hours in the honey house. And the boxes are broke down. They're put through this little machine which uncaps. See this capping on top of this comb? It's in the box here. This machine has knives that vibrate in it that cut both sides off, so it exposes the honey below. And then they're transferred from this machine into these two large centrifuges that spin about 114 frames at a time, or about 50 gallons of honey per spin. And one machine will be spinning honey, and the other machine will be being unloaded and reloaded at the same time. So it's very productive. And right behind them, there's about a 600 gallon or a 10 barrel old milk tank, stainless steel milk tank. So all that bulk honey goes through a gravity filter down here, and then it's pumped over into that milk tank. We produce comb honey, which is honey that's eaten right out of the comb, and it starts off like this. So we introduced that frame. You might have saw my daughter earlier in the picture. She was actually making these frames up. And the bees will draw this natural pure beeswax comb and start filling it with nectar, and then it'll eventually be finished off into comb honey that we can cut out without doing the mechanical process and be sold. A lot of charcuterie boards and things like that. And some of the products we produce are varietal honeys around Florida. Most of the Florida honeys, you'd be surprised, there's 6 or 7 primary varietals in Florida: orange blossom, tupelo, black mangrove, gallberry, saw palmetto, Brazilian pepper. And then we have our own local, hyper-local wildflower that comes within our beltway here in Jacksonville. And that's kind of what we're known for in our neighborhood, is providing the local honey. We produce packaged comb honey. One of the byproducts of the harvesting is when we remove these wax cappings, we end up with beeswax. And beeswax is used for many uses, from, obviously the candles, to bulk beeswax could be used in industry for blacksmiths, or even Caterpillar manufacturing uses it for protecting the machine parts after being machined, so they can be put in storage without corrosion. Military uses it for ordnance, coating ordnance. So they're some of the biggest producers. The Catholic Church is up there in the top 3 for candles, because part of their religious ceremony, it must have beeswax in it. So those are probably the 3 top users. And then you got the cosmetic industry and things like that. So beeswax is a byproduct that's fairly valuable to beekeepers. We also break down the local honeys, and we create a cream honey line, which my wife is mostly responsible for creating, and some things as simple as cinnamon cream honey, or one of our new ones is peach daddle pepper infused honey. So, and then we also, this one's roasted toasted salted pecans. I stole this. I was in Georgia one day, and why not mix roasted pecans with honey, right? I bought a jar of it from another beekeeper and brought it home, and it was gone in the day. So I said, we have to add that to our list. So those are just some of the products that we produce and package and sell here in Jacksonville. We sell through wholesale, Whole Foods, Fresh Market, and numerous mom and pops, and as well as we have a retail store on Edgewood Avenue, right there in Murray Hill. So these are just some random pictures. I started not only my father-in-law with his beekeeping career and talking with him about bees. This gentleman right here, George Waldock. Anybody know George Waldock? That name ring a bell? He's one of the local old timers. He has recently passed away a couple years ago, but he was one day for his 100th birthday.
Wow.
He took me under his wing when he was 93, I think, because the next 2 years we had a 93rd birthday for him, and I couldn't figure out whether he was 93 actually or he was already 100. I don't know, but he was a super nice gentleman, and he took me out in the bee yard several times and taught me the ropes. And one thing he told me when we were out in the bee yard was, he says, I kept asking questions and aggravating. He liked to show you more than he liked to talk about it. So I would draw out words from him, like asking a question. He looked at me and said, will you please just watch what I'm doing and stop asking all these questions? So I asked him one more question. And he turned around and looked at me and he says, you know, he said, one thing about this thing, I've been keeping bees since I was knee high to my grandfather. And he says, one thing I like about this is I've never stopped learning. And didn't think nothing of it, just said, okay, and we moved on our day. And years go by, maybe a year or two, 3, and somebody like y'all asked me a question. And something in my head said, ding, that's the answer to what I've been thinking about for the past 5 years. And it made me go right back to this moment thinking, that's probably what happened with him. I probably asked that question or said that one comment that kind of answered a question he's been debating for years. But he's right about that. We never stop learning. We're constantly working. These are just some nice scenery. We always like to paint the pretty picture of this business. We're always out in beautiful meadows or fields or traveling the country. But it is a hard business. There's a picture of my son. We have to, when we're raising new young bees, we have to supplement them with sugar water. So we haul these tanks of syrup around with hoses like you fill in your gas tank with stuff, and feeding bees and inspecting bees and building the equipment. I started off as a not migratory beekeeper. I was a migratory beekeeper with not migratory equipment, if that makes sense. So each of these beehives I would move by hand. They'd weigh about 150 pounds, and we would move them in the middle of the night. And bees would come pouring out. You can see them hanging all over. But when I'd have to take them off the trailer after driving an hour down the highway or so, they did not like us. And we would hand place them on top of these stands. Later we got smarter and invested in palletized equipment. So there's 4 beehives on a pallet, and we're able to use the loaders to load and unload our bees.
Time.
And then this is a couple little history pictures of Christy's. This is Christy herself when she was a kid. Old one of the honey frames, and then her dad and his old bee trucks and equipment all around the country. He used to go all the way to South Florida and up the Dakotas. All right. That wraps up my spiel. Anybody got any questions? Go ahead.
Got time for a couple questions, if you don't mind waiting for me to come around the mic.
Have you had any experience or you seen colony collapse disease get into your hives or those phenomena that they talk about?
Yes, most definitely. Colony collapse was a coin word kind of name in the political and media system. They had to come up with something for it, so we called it colony collapse disorder. And many years has passed by since that day, roughly 2006. It brought some new money in the industry, and we were able to start doing some research that needed to be done. And we pretty much narrowed it down to a few things, but the number one cause is Varroa destructor, which is a parasite that lives on the adult bees, reproduces in the bee colony in the brood cycle. So it damages developing pupa bees as well as infects them with viruses. That's the number one cause of collapse. We do see as much as 30 in a good year, maybe 30% losses, and a bad year, maybe as many as 50% losses. It just every year has a different cycle. It seems like we get for every good year we get a bad year. So it's like we came out of a good year and we're having a little bit of a bad year this year. And we saw that how we reproduce the hives through those nooks and we rebuild them from the parent colonies. That's how we reestablish those losses. And then those weaker hives don't make as much honey the next year, so we don't produce as much yield as we would want to.
Trying to get some perspective on the end of it. For example, per acre.
So studies show that in cultivated crops, it's usually about two hives per acre. And that study was done to say how many bee visits or how much bee density you need per acre to cover that crop. I think there's somewhat of a similarity to that in the nectar producing side, the honey side of the business as well, not just the pollination side. Sometimes if it's a really good location, you might be able to put 10 hives per acre if it's producing that much yield. Like you get up in the Midwest in the clover fields where it's nothing but mecca clover and they're producing 200 or 300 pounds a hive in that season, you may be able to have a lot more bee density than if you were to be on some other less prolific type plants.
You lease land from people.
Normally we try to barter honey and trade for land space, and because we're migratory, the time that we're spent on people's property is very short-lived. We may be in and out within 2 months and then gone. Currently we're near timber, Everybody's very familiar with them. They're all around us. They do lease bee land where they do the hunting license. And some advantages with getting in lease land like that is the fact that you've kind of got guaranteed places to put your bees every year. Whereas with a private individual, with the way the Northeast is developing, you may be in a spot one year and it's sold the next year. So we do battle that day in, day out, but we deal with it differently. We try obviously to barter first, and then we try to do, if we have to go a little bit further, we'll do these things.
As a boy, I caught thousands of these barehanded. One day I just caught. Eating them, you know, out there, or nails, or why would I get stuck by one?
So bees are naturally docile. They really don't mean you harm. Once they sting, they're dead. They lose their stinger, it pulls out part of their intestines, and then they die. But mostly when you find bees in the wild, if you're not directly messing with the hive itself, but they're just like a swarm of bees on a bush or something, they're not going to sting you. You just had an unlucky day the day they did sting you. I get stung sometimes. Sometimes I'll get out of the truck at a bee yard and one just stings me in the head right away. And it's like, I didn't do anything yet. So you do have some of those situations. All right, I think my time's up.
How many times did you start with 12 years ago? What have you got now?
So back in the early days, we actually weren't keeping bees for our own production. We were buying in bees to sell with bee equipment. We were a manufacturing industry first 13 years ago, and that lasted for a good 5-year stint. But immediately what the demand locally was for bees. So we had to pair up our commercial clients that had bees with our bee equipment we're manufacturing to sell. We started off with kind of zero, but within the first few years, we started having 20 hives to 80 hives to 100 hives. And then it wasn't probably until the past, 5 or 6 years, we started building hundreds of hives. And our goal is to maintain about 600 to 1,000 hives year round. And if you have 1,000, you probably have 600 that are productive, or the other 400 are in some form of limbo, whether they're requeening or dying or something. So you have to have more than you anticipate for.
Great, thank you very much.
Yeah. So at the end of the meeting today, if you want, we're going to have do some sampling of some of the products, but you can also take a close look up of the bees that we brought with us too. So thank y'all for inviting me.
Sean Swapson.
So thank you so much. That was fascinating. I had no idea it was so complicated. So thank you for being here with us today. Really appreciate that very much. As somebody that uses a lot of honey instead of sugar, that was fascinating. Gosh. And thank you, Mike, for being here today. Please, all of y'all, please know that you're always welcome here at our club. We hope to see you again and often. A reminder that our speaker next week will be Amanda, the manager of the Maple Street Biscuit Company. And she was here visiting, I think, last week. So I hope you had a chance to meet her last week. Please don't forget to keep Scott Emery in your thoughts and prayers tomorrow. And then after that, as he recovers, don't forget to check DAC-DB for our calendar of events that, as you go along through the week. And Past President Shep is going to lead us in our 4-way test. Shep?
So please join me first. Is it the three? Second?
Fair to all concerned.
Third?
Will fit friendships.
Fourth?
Will be beneficial to all concerned.
Thank you. And I usually try to leave you with an inspirational quote. And I have one of those today, but then I found one that I just couldn't resist. And it's in honor of the fact that it's golf week out at TPC. If you're caught on a golf course during a storm and are afraid of lightning, hold up a 1-iron. Not even God can hit a 1-iron. Leach Ravino. Y'all have a great week. If you go out to a golf tournament, be careful. Take care.